So we are finally here with our pilot episode of Bama Versus. We couldn't be more excited to have you guys along for the ride. I am Clint Lamb, sitting here with my co-host Jake Weaver. We are both with Touchdown Alabama Magazine. So with this being Bama Versus, what we're going to be doing is comparing Alabama to, really any and everything else because they are the gold standard in college football. So for this pilot episode, I'm going to go ahead and kick it to Jake to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today.
I'm really excited to be here today as well, guys, and we've got you a really special episode in store. We're going to discuss one of the most prominent quarterback competitions in all of the lands right now between Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa. We saw a whole lot of what Tua was capable of in the national championship game, but we've seen a lot more of Jalen over the last 2 seasons. The big thing that we want to discuss today is if we were Nick Saban, who would we want to roll out a quarterback for the 2018 season? Clint, I'm going to ask you, do you feel like you can leave a talent that we've seen and believe that Tua Tagovailoa is on the bench for the entirety of next year in favor of Jalen Hurts?
Well, first of all, I definitely don't want to take away anything from Jalen. Being 25-2 as a starter, almost leading Alabama to a national championship game, only coming within a couple of minutes against Clemson back in 2016. He's had phenomenal moments, especially as a true freshman. I feel like he regressed a little bit this past year, but I definitely think that Alabama has themselves a quarterback competition, and it's really, how do you bench a guy like Jalen Hurts who has had so much success early on in his career? I mean, he was SEC Offensive Player of the Year as a true freshman. Last season, he threw 17 touchdowns to only 1 interception, only turned the ball over 2 times all season, over 2,000 passing yards. I mean, there's just a lot to love about Jalen Hurts, both on the field in certain aspects, but especially off the field. And we saw that a little bit following the national championship game and during the national championship game when he handled it so well. But I think with a guy like Tua, you have a rare breed of quarterback that only comes along, a generational talent. And so I think that Saban definitely has a, huge quarterback competition brewing simply because of what each player brings to the table. And I'm sure that's what we're going to be discussing today. But really, to start, what are some positives about Jalen that you personally like?
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I think Jalen has the personality of a leader. Some would call it the it factor, but the way he carries himself on and off the field is what really makes him stand out from kids his age. I don't think that you can look at a guy like that and see the things that he did to know that he was taken, the job was taken from him. The national championship, half the game on the line. He's got 2 quarters from getting himself that revenge he wanted so bad from his first season, and it was taken from him. That opportunity was taken away from him, and then Alabama went on to win in spectacular fashion. And while he was a huge part of the year, he probably felt left out right there. He felt like the biggest play of the season he was not a part of. And to see him, instead of him just being, letting it be what it was and being a little upset by it, he didn't look upset. He didn't sound upset. He seemed genuinely excited for his guys, his team. He loves the guys. And I think, to me, that's what you want out of a guy. That's what you want out of a young player.
Well, I will say, as far as his abilities or that kind of clutch factor, he definitely seems to have the demeanor where he seems relatively calm in a lot of those big situations. But I've often wondered the play in those moments when he's making plays with his legs. The calmness seems real. It seems confident. It seems authentic. But I've often wondered if he more so has that duck on water, where on the surface everything seems extremely calm, but kind of underneath he's going crazy. As far as when he's being asked to do things that are outside of the norm for him, which is kind of lining up and throwing the football around a little bit in certain situations where maybe the game flow is not exactly playing to the way Alabama wants it to. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that because I do completely understand that is one thing that he's kind of become known for, is that calmness or that cool confidence. But do you really think that it is fully I don't want to use the word genuine, but do you think it's real, or do you think some of it's fabricated?
Well, I don't think that anybody, especially at the age of 20, can really sit down and on the biggest stage of your career in front of 100,000 plus people to just completely let everything fade away Nick Saban himself has discussed the feelings before a game. He's been doing this his entire life. He's won multiple national championships. He's at different schools. We all know he is probably the premier college football coach in the nation. It might be one of the best might be the best of all time. But even he gets nervous before games. He discussed how nervous he is. He discussed how even during those pregame interviews on the sideline, how he's got nerves and jitters and he's scared. He goes in there nervous. Did he prepare the guys right? Did he do the things he needed to do? Was there something he forgot? And I don't think that I don't think there's a soul who can go out there and let that stuff just not faze them. But I think what it comes down to is, just like Nick Saban will show you, even though he might yell at you a little bit, he never has that nervous demeanor on the sideline. You don't see him chewing the fingernails. You don't see him picking the grass off the sideline and eating it. You don't see him doing those things that these other coaches and these guys do when they get into these tight games. He appears, just like I think Jalen does, he appears, like you said, a duck on water. I think he just looks like he's ready, even though inside he might be screaming a little bit. And I think Jalen has the same thing. And that's what you want out of a leader, though. Even though they're scared, they need to be able to get out there and show their team that they're confident. Otherwise, the rest of the guys are going to feel the same way.
Well, that's an excellent point, and I do agree with you. And there has been situations where Jalen has come through in, clutch moments. I mean, you look back at Mississippi State. Now, he did get helped a little bit by Todd Grantham sending, pretty much an all-out blitz on 3rd and long. Made Jalen's job pretty easy on that quick slant to Ridley. But at the same time, the very next play, he comes through with a dime throw to Devontae Smith to win the game. Now, that is the only time he's actually brought the team back with his arm, but there has been several other moments, whether it be LSU in his true freshman season, whether it be Clemson in the national championship game, where he's able to provide that clutch gene. It's just a difference of clutch gene, I guess you would say, because he does it with his legs, and there's absolutely no doubt that his legs are a very strong asset for the offense. I mean, I think that people get a little bit carried away with the comparisons to Cam Newton. I heard those multiple times this season, but I do think when you look at him and his running style, it's, as far as being a runner, is not that different. Now, he's not as strong of a runner as Cam was, but he does have that ability to either A, make you miss, or B, run you over if needed. He runs with power, and he also has the ability to be elusive when asked. He doesn't necessarily have quick feet, but he does have the ability to make guys miss, and we saw that multiple times, whether it be against Ole Miss, LSU. There was a lot of times where his legs came through in the clutch, and you can tell he seems like a much more confident quarterback when he's running the football. But as far as being a passer, I think that lack of confidence as a passer really hindered the Alabama offense this year compared to a guy like Tagovailoa. So we kind of hit on Jalen a little bit, and we'll get back to him. But what do you think about Tagovailoa and what he brings to the Alabama offense compared to Jalen?
Well, one more thing on the Jalen running, I think, is that the strength in his legs. He's so grounded that it's hard to take him down with just one guy. You think when you have a quarterback running, you should be able to get him down with one player. One guy should hit him, but he so often missed that first guy. The offensive line was a little off their usual game this season, and time after time he was having to step up or step left or step right to get away from the defender that was breaking through the pocket, and he made that look so easy. And a lot of times his ability to run the football and to get it past the line of scrimmage really was what saved Alabama's season so many times. But to discuss what Tua brings to the table as compared to Jalen, I think you have to look at it from, Tua has a little bit of that scrambling style. I would say his scrambling is more of the Brett Favre scrambling. It's not so much the I'm going to run it straight down your throat and succeed like Jalen's. It's more of a I can get out of pressure if it hits me. He showed during that 3rd and 7 during the national championship game where he shook off 3 or 4 players. And I don't know that many of us can sit here and say we've seen anybody, let alone a quarterback, do that kind of a thing and still manage to get out and have the mentality to get past the line of scrimmage. Another thing to think about is the mental aspect. You touched on that you think that the fact that Jalen never really was able to learn to be the passer that he wanted to be when he came into Alabama. that it affected his play overall and that it affected other areas of his play. And I think with Tua, I think maybe he has a little more natural instinct. The gift he has is that he has the ability to do and see these things before they happen that I think Jalen lacks, or maybe it's the confidence he lacks. But I think Tua has that, and because of that, his confidence is so much higher.
Well, I definitely agree with you. And see, to me, I don't think in some ways Jalen was given enough of a chance. People expected development from year 1 to year 2. Now, granted, he went backwards in a lot of ways, and everything that he had tried to learn as far as the mental processing, the going from your first read to your second read, not relying on his legs so much in those moments where you have to improvise. I do feel like he was showing improvement in that area. Whether, granted, the spring game, it wasn't live as far as on the quarterbacks, but I do feel like he was showing some progress. And from what I had seen in practices and such, he had been showing progress. But I think that once the season got started, they were playing some, excellent defensive lines. And the offensive line, to me, was not set up in a way that would give Jalen the time in live action to be able to continue to grow that confidence. And I think that that's key. I think that, from the very first game against Florida State, when he was thrown out there after really trying to work on all these things, he was running for his life. The offensive line did not have a great game. And granted, they were playing against one of the best defensive lines in the country, or at least what was supposed to have been one of the most talented defensive lines in the country, I guess I should say. But I just feel like that from that moment, he regressed back to everything that he had done as far as being a weakness in his freshman season, and he never really recovered from that.
And I think that a lot of that stems from the fact that there was no protection up front. And so when you're a quarterback who your probably entire football career, that relied so heavily on running, when you're not getting the protection that you should be getting up front, like you said, you're going to resort to that. You're going to revert right back to what you used to do to get out of that attempt. And instead of sitting in the pocket and giving a little more time for your receivers, your immediate reaction is to run for your life.
I agree. And the thing about it is I was looking back, and I want to say that it was I was watching some film from last year in 2016, and I saw Jalen making some throws that I didn't see him making this year. He was taking more risk, and I really started to think about why was he taking those risks last year compared to this year. And really, I think it was of course, it was the game against Clemson in the playoff where Calvin Ridley, the primary receiver, was wide open in the back of the end zone, and Jalen chose not to throw him the football. And he was staring right at him, and I didn't understand. I understand that the linebacker was kind of sitting underneath a little bit, but that is a throw that most quarterbacks both, should make and would make, and he didn't pull the trigger. And then, so I got to thinking to myself, there's got to be something mental here. And as I dove into it, him compared to Tua, and from the Tua perspective, what really kind of made everything come full circle was following the national championship game when he was giving all praise to God. And it really got me thinking, these rare breed of quarterbacks that come along so rarely, they have this ability from a mental aspect to create unwavering confidence in themselves. And, they always say, play the next play, forget about everything that's happened. And in theory, that sounds good, but so few people can actually do that. And, one thing about us as people, and this is anybody, is we always revert to who we think we are. Whether that, we can think consciously or want to make changes in our life, but on a subconscious level, you always revert to this, self-image that as far as who you think you are. And when I look at Jalen, I started thinking about it. Who had he become since he had gotten to the University of Alabama? As a true freshman, from very early on in his career, Saban had drilled in all the quarterbacks' heads. He wasn't even supposed to be in the competition. And yet, as a true freshman, he wound up being in the competition. And the number one reason, Saban had said, it's not the guy that makes the most plays that will win this job. It's the guy that makes the least amount of mistakes. So very early on in his career, he started associating success with not turning the ball over or being safe with the football. And I think that continued to grow, as well as he was getting constantly praised and already had a belief system in his ability to provide big plays with his legs. So when you watch that play against Clemson and you understand kind of where he's coming from, he didn't make the throw in that moment where Ridley was initially open.
So I want to go back to you while we're still discussing this and kind of come to another player that you might, I'm sure you recognize the name of, Jeff Driscoll of Florida. He was there for, 3 or 4 seasons, and his time at Florida was very much marred by the fact that they were a pretty awful team. And they lost to Louisville during one of their bowl games. They didn't make another bowl game. It was bad, and a lot of the blame was placed on his shoulders. And when you look at his last year of Florida, he was 53% completion percentage for 1,140 yards, but he threw 9 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. Ultimately, he reverted, like we're talking about, he reverted to the player that everybody in the stands thought he was. He reverted to that guy who was only there to run the football, couldn't throw. He reverts to that because that's what he was comfortable with, because he felt like he was scared to throw. He got that way. His second year, when he was really the starter, he was 12 touchdowns, 5 picks. And like you said with Jalen, his first season, he showed a lot of promise. You have to wonder, with the talk of the fan base, knowing that Tua was coming in, and then seeing Tua and all the unbelievable plays Tua made when he was able to get out there, like the game against Vanderbilt this season, did the Tua breathing down his neck, did that alter his mindset at all? Did that make him a little nervous? And, you said he was praised for protecting the football. Well, he went into ultra protective mode because he didn't want to lose the job.
I think ultimately he held on to the one thing, or the couple of things that he had on Tua, and that was his ability to protect the football and his legs. Tua is a capable runner, but he does not provide the electric type of plays in the run game that a guy like Jalen Hurts does. Football is on just completely subconscious. You cannot, in the moment when you're playing the game, you cannot think on a conscious level. It's happening too fast. It's way too reactive. And the way that, football people refer to it is they refer to people's instincts. But really what they're saying is they're talking about your subconscious. And so Jalen, I think, in the offseason was trying to make all these changes mentally and, staying in the pocket, but he didn't change those things on a subconscious level. And I think that's why in those, fast-paced moments, the subconscious mind always takes over, and it was reverting back to who he thinks he was. And just like you mentioned with Driscoll, I think it's the same way. They reverted back to what made them comfortable as football players. And, if it's funny, when you're watching that Clemson play and you see that he didn't make the throw when he's standing in the pocket and the primary receiver was wide open, because he didn't want to potentially risk turning the ball over, and in the middle of the end zone, it's a throw that he should have made, but he just wasn't confident in it. Now, if you continue to watch that play, of course, we all know he ends up rolling right. Now he's on the run, so he's using his legs, which is automatically going to make him more confident, and he ends up, ironically, throwing a touchdown pass to Ridley on the exact same play, but it's because at a different spot, and it was a dime throw. It was an excellent throw, but you saw the confidence grow as the play progressed. Now, compare that to a guy like Tua. Tua doesn't approach the game. Every time he steps in the field, I think Jalen is telling himself all the things he can't do. I can't risk making this throw. I can't turn the ball over here. He's thinking about the limits and trying to limit what he does. I think Tua approaches it with a completely different mindset, and that is everything he can do. And I think, the funny aspect of it is watching that post-game interview, I think him talking about God is where you see that he's got that belief. I don't know at what point in his career, but he started believing, and there's that scripture that says, you can do all things through Christ. I think Tua has taken that to a very literal sense, and he's embedded that on a subconscious level and really just in his DNA. He believes every time he steps on the football field, there is nothing that he can't do. And it's why you see things like that Vanderbilt play where he scrambles a little bit and then, just as he's getting hit, turns around and throws just a dime for a touchdown. Or the 3rd and 7 play in the national championship game where he should have been sacked. It's just he can go out there on 4 consecutive possessions and throw 4 consecutive picks. And on that 5th possession, he still steps onto the field believing that he can do anything he wants to do. It's an unwavering belief. And people find different ways to feel that. And I think his is religiously based. And so that's where I think a little bit of the different mental aspects come from.
And that mental aspect is such a huge thing. Like you said, it's really subconscious. Everything you do consciously comes before the play and during the film room sessions. And what you realize is when the guys are going out there and they play to their strengths or they play to the way they want, that's when the true form of that quarterback comes out. And I think with Driscoll, and I have to go back to him because he's such a familiar story to me as far as the Jalen Hurts thing goes. You know, Driscoll's career took a sudden change. He went from Florida to Louisiana Tech. The most passing yards he ever threw at Florida was in his 2nd year when he was actually the starter. He threw for just a little over 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Not great numbers, not one you'd look at and care about. He goes to, obviously the Conference USA is a lot different than the SEC, but he goes to Louisiana Tech and he throws for 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions. He threw 448 attempts. That's twice as many as he's had his entire career at any other year. I think what you have to look at is he showed the ability to do it. Nobody thought he could throw it. It doesn't matter what conference you put him in. Nobody thought that kid could go out and throw the football. Nobody thought that. There was not a soul there. Then he goes on to be a backup quarterback. I think he's still kind of bouncing around teams. He was with Cincinnati last offseason. I'm not sure if he's still there. But who would have picked a guy that threw for 9 touchdowns and 10 interceptions his last season at Florida? Well, nobody. And who would want that guy? Because he sounds pretty awful. But of course, he drops down to a different competition, but he still showed the ability to do something that nobody thought he could do because, well, now all of a sudden Louisiana Tech fans and everybody are excited because we've got a guy who was supposed to be really good, didn't turn out great, but he's still a quarterback that used to quarterback at Florida. That's a big deal. And just like when Cam Newton left Georgia to go play at that FCS school he played at. I mean, they're thinking this cat is going to be a problem in the locker room, and no, they didn't think any of that. They were excited because he was a big recruit, and we all know he won the championship there for them, and then went on to Auburn and Carolina. I think you have to compare that with Jalen because I think Jalen has this mentality that the fan base has pushed on him since day one, the belief that he cannot throw the ball. And I think, like you said, he holds on to that one last thing he has over Tua, which is the fact that he can take care of the football. And that has hurt him more than helped him.
I think you're right. And I think that, you look at guys like Driscoll and what they've been able to do since leaving, and whether that be Cam when he left Florida, when he got to Blinn College for that year, I think that what it is for them is a mental reset button, and that does not always reset the confidence, but in some cases it does. I think where we haven't seen that confidence reset is guys like Blake Barnett transferring out to Arizona State. I think he's continuing to have the same issues that he had at Alabama out there, but there are certain guys, especially when you can look and say it's not really an abilities issue, it's a confidence issue. And there was just a lot of different occasions that Hurts didn't throw the football in situations that he would have even as a true freshman. And I think that is a confidence issue, and where that stems from, it very well could be the fan base, it could be the media. Now, I do know that the media really praised Jalen for his abilities, and rightfully so. Now, I do feel like that there were times that people were a little bit over the top in how much praise he got, but for the most part, he absolutely deserved, his abilities to contribute to not only the offense but to the team. He was something for Alabama as a true freshman that they needed at the time, and it helped them go to the national championship game. And while he was very limited down the stretch in the postseason, there was a lot of I look at it and say, would a guy like Cooper Bateman or David Cornwell or one of those guys have done any better? And I just don't think so. So I think he was what Alabama needed at the time, but that was with a guy like Tagovailoa, still in high school. And now that Tagovailoa is on the roster, I mean, this guy is throwing, his season persisted of him throwing a touchdown pass on every 7 attempts. He had 11 touchdowns despite only throwing the ball 77 times. Jalen, on the other hand, it took over twice the amount of attempts. It took 15 for him to throw a touchdown pass. He had 254 attempts, and yet he only threw 17 touchdowns. And when you look at the yardage and what Tua was able to do, especially the touchdowns, that is such an elite statistic. Now, granted, it's a small sample size, and so you could definitely expect that to come down or regress back to the mean a little bit with more opportunities if he does end up being the starter in 2018. But you look at what he would have been able to accomplish had he gotten – now, granted, because he was getting so many attempts or playing in so many second halves, Jalen didn't quite have the same amount of pass attempts that he did the season before when he threw for 382 attempts. Coker the year before that had 393, and Sims the year before that had 391. So if you take those, roughly 385 to 390 attempts and you give all those to Tua, based off of the numbers that he put up, if you extrapolate that over the course of an entire season, he's putting up 3,200 passing yards, which is not, it's really good, but it's not necessarily elite, but it's 55 touchdown passes. That is elite, especially when you add in, the over 400 yards rushing that he would have had and the 6 rushing touchdowns. He can be a special type of player for Alabama, and it's not necessarily a knock on Hurts. It's that Tagovailoa is the kind of player that only comes around, once every 10 years. And the fact that he is now playing for the University of Alabama, and they have not had that guy. They have won championship after championship without having that elite player. A.J. McCarron was an excellent quarterback. Greg McElroy, excellent quarterback. But none of those guys were the pure elite passing talents that Tagovailoa provides. And when you combine that with Alabama's ability to consistently field elite defenses and put elite playmakers around the quarterback, this Alabama football team can be extremely dangerous in 2018 and moving forward with Tua as that guy.
And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Tua has a lot more instinct. He's got a lot more of that basic instinct to be a quarterback that a lot of these other guys didn't have. Blake Sims came in as a running back. Coker bounced around, and there was times where nobody thought he would ever play quarterback. And he came in, lost the quarterback competition his first season, took over the second season, looked pretty daggum good doing it, won a championship, everything went well. A.J. McCarron came in. He was not necessarily the highest recruit you could have. A lot of people wanted Phillip Sims to start that season instead. A.J. showed up, proved he was the more elite quarterback, and he ended up having a great year. But what you realize is with a true freshman like Tua Tagovailoa, he's got these instincts that make him a great pocket passer, as well as the ability to move around and be mobile in that pocket, which, like you said, just is so rare. I mean, the reason that Jalen was so, believed to be a runner only is because a lot of guys these days that run the football a lot are criticized for their throwing ability because they're told they don't have ability to throw the ball. Lamar Jackson won a Heisman Trophy last year, yet people still want to say he can't throw the football. He showed he could.
Which is completely inaccurate.
Exactly.
Absolutely. He's an NFL prospect. There's no doubt about that. That's a topic that really, anybody that watches him on film, I understand that there are some deficiencies. There are things that he needs to prove on as a quarterback, but there is no doubt in my mind that he has the capabilities to be a high-level NFL quarterback. And for anybody suggesting, people that try to compare Lamar Jackson as far as his inabilities as a passer compared to Jalen right now for Jalen, I think is, very, lazy. I think that just because he's elite with his legs does not necessarily mean that he can't be a highly productive passer, and I think that Lamar Jackson right now is. Now, granted, he also showed a ton of improvement from last year, his Heisman Trophy year, which he was pretty good, but to this year, just different things. He was doing a lot more NFL level stuff this season compared to last, and I really think that if he very well could end up falling in the draft, but I absolutely love Lamar Jackson as a prospect. But getting back to the whole Jalen thing and comparing that to Tua, I just think that when you're looking at the complete package and you're looking at Tua as far as being able, he does provide some of the dual threat abilities that Jalen does. Now, I think a big issue today is that people throw around the term dual threat too often. Dual threat means you are a threat in two different ways, your legs and your arm. People that are, guys, and I'm just being honest, right now Jalen is not a dual threat quarterback. He is a running quarterback. There's a difference because he is not a consistent threat with his arm. Tua, on the other hand, is enough of a dual threat guy to where you can label him as such. He definitely can make plays with his legs. He can most certainly make plays with his arm. And I think that, you look at what we saw from the offense when Tua came in the game, you really started to understand that the ball has not been the issue all year. When the playbook was so limited with Hurts under the center, it was zone reads, it was swing passes to the running back, it was design QB runs, and there was the occasional deep shot down the field that typically didn't work out, and then it was slants. And that was a whole lot of Alabama's offense when Hurts was under center. But once you got Tua out there, it was a completely different ball game, and you could see that it opened up everything. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on Hurts' ability to go to multiple receivers compared to a guy like Tua. What did you see when you saw Tua out there compared to Jalen?
Well, I believe, immediately, I think on that first or the second drive, Tua goes. Pretty sure he hits Ruggs for a big one. I know he hit Ridley for sure. But he goes out and he was showing the ability to hit those guys. He was able to get multiple players, multiple receivers each drive. He wasn't so stuck on his first read. He was able to come off his first read. The thing like the fourth down play, 4th and 2, I think it was, 3 minutes to go in the game, Alabama's trailing by a touchdown. You cannot take a sack and you cannot throw the ball away. And if you get into the position where Jalen might have done, where he's going to commit to the run, he no longer has an open pass. When you roll out, you are diminishing so much space. You're giving up so much space because you're not supposed to throw across your body. So you have so little room to throw the ball anymore, and it's easy for the defense to fit there. So with what Tua was able to do, he stood in the pocket. There was a little pressure. He stood, and he waited. And it was probably one of the most heart-wrenching moment to see him just stand there. We're just waiting. What's going to happen? And as if it was the easiest thing he's ever done, he predicts exactly where Calvin Ridley was going to be, and he throws it right. And there was a defender running right in front of where he threw that ball. He was able to put it behind the defender in front of Calvin Ridley, and it was perfect.
And that's kind of the thing is, to me, Tua, from the time that he first went out there, was throwing to spots, not players. And I think that, I'm pretty sure that they mentioned that in the broadcast, but that is such an underrated part as far as being a receiver. As a quarterback, you have to be able to do that in order to put your receivers in the best position to catch footballs. And, whether it be on an intermediate to short level or deep. If you look at the deep numbers, it's really not even a contest. On passes traveling 20-plus yards downfield this season, Tagovailoa only attempted 11 of them, compared to Hurts, who attempted 39, so almost 4 times as many, and yet Tua had 4 touchdown passes of 20-plus yards, compared to Hurts, who only had 3. And Hurts only completed, roughly 33% of his passes, only a third of them, only 13, compared to Tua, who completed over 50%, which is in an elite category. Granted, it is a small sample size, but just their abilities, all season, whether it be Florida State. From the Florida State game, I was very defensive of Jalen, because if you go back and look at that film, despite what the statistics say, Jalen had a pretty good performance. And I definitely feel like the defense that he was going against, he was being wrongly attacked, given the improvement that he showed. And it just seemed like there were so many unfortunate circumstances that happened, whether it be, penalties calling plays that he completed back, pass interference calls that would have been, long touchdowns or drop footballs. And I remember thinking this, Hurts statistics don't fall on Hurts' shoulders. He played a pretty good football game. But as the season continued and you continued to see those what you would call unfortunate things happening, you started realizing, how unlucky can someone be before you start saying maybe it's something that they're doing. Now, I don't know what that is, but for whatever reason, those balls just continued to barely be overthrown, or there would continue to be pass interference calls. There was so much what seemed to be poor luck involved, but at the same time, at a certain point, you got to start saying maybe just for whatever reason, something that Jalen's doing causes all of this to happen. And that's when I started thinking that at the end of the day, the offense is not as effective as it needs to be. They need to be looking into making a change. And the people that, I will give them full credit for the 25-2 record. I do think it's impressive. But when you look at every other Alabama quarterback, they're all kind of in that same range too, no matter who it's been. It could be, from 2009 on, Greg McElroy didn't have a whole lot of losses. A.J. McCarron didn't, Jacob Coker didn't, Blake Sims didn't. Just all of those guys have had solid records because of the teams that surround them. And because of that, I just think that pointing to a 25-2 record and saying, this proves that Jalen is a great quarterback, I think that's very inaccurate. And I think that you're looking way too much on the surface in that area. But I just, I think, to me, when you look at the complete package, I think Tua brings so much more to the offense at this point in time than Jalen.
So you talked about how you weren't sure what it was, but it seemed like every time Hurts was out there on the field, something was going just barely wrong, but there was always something. It was a stutter. It was a overthrown ball, underthrown ball, drop ball, something. And I think what some people have failed to realize is the fact that Jalen was not seen as a threat in the passing game. It took away from the defenders. They were the secondary, the people they were putting back in the secondary. And the problem was there were so few times Jalen was able to even hit a wide open guy on a open slant like we used to see with Ridley all the time with Coker, where he would be so open on the deep post and Hurts would overthrow it. Or Hurts would do that. And I think it mentally affected him. It changed the offensive play calling scheme because they didn't want to waste it down knowing that they could have scored and wouldn't have. I think the biggest thing though is the defenses we played all season long were some of the greatest defensive lines, and they were blitzing extra people. And our offensive line, the offensive line absolutely could not handle it. There was no way they could handle those guys. They were not, for this season, they just weren't quite talented enough to keep the guys off the quarterback. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there was no belief that they could throw the football. And you don't see that many blitzes. You won't see them bring the entire house on third down if you have a true pocket passer against Mississippi State. Now, obviously, that worked in the benefit of Alabama, but you won't see that often if you have a true passer. And I think what you have to come down to is the biggest stat. Again, yes, when Tua goes into the game, they're down 13 points. They get a touchdown. They're down again another 13 points right afterwards. So there was obviously a lot more throwing needed to be done. But if you look at the stats, for the first half, Jalen threw 8 times, completed 3 throws on 8 attempts. That's it, 8. That's the lowest he's had since Mercer when he only played like a quarter or two and he threw 7 balls. But he only threw it 8 times. Tua, true freshman, very little experience, comes in and is given 3 times as many throws in the same amount of time, essentially the same amount of time. 24 throws, he completes 14 of those for 3 touchdowns. Now again, 3 touchdowns. Jalen had one game all year where he threw 3 touchdowns against Mercer. Tua also threw 3 touchdowns against Mercer and against Georgia. I think when you look at, like we talked about, when you look at who you want to be that quarterback, you want the guy that's going to score the points. You want the guy that's going to get the ball down the field the most consistently, that brings you the most diversity on offense. Because Alabama doesn't run a triple option Georgia Tech type of offense. They don't run that. They run the throwing the ball off the run game to be able to get and hit the open guys downfield. With a guy like Tua, the defense will play off of the line. They won't bring extra guys in the box. They're going to have those guys playing off, which gives Najee Harris, Damian Harris, Joshua Jacobs the extra running room, the ability to maybe wiggle free on big plays like we saw with Derrick Henry so much during his Heisman Trophy winning season.
And I think that's an excellent point. And I think that, when you look at probably the most impressed I've been with Tagovailoa in his true freshman season was I watched him very closely following the 2 interceptions, whether it was the one against Tennessee that was returned for a touchdown or whether it was the one against Georgia. And he got better after those 2 interceptions in both of those games. And that is so rare for a quarterback. And that's the kind of thing that you can live with the mistakes when the guy improves following the mistake. He's not going to make a ton of them in a game. Now, I'm not saying there won't be a game where he won't throw with 3 interceptions, but I also think in that same game he has the ability to throw you 5 touchdowns. And I don't think that's going to be an every game kind of thing. I just think that things don't get to Tua in the same way that they do most quarterbacks. And if you watch him on film, it's just you see the confidence, and this is why I said that when you compare him to Jalen, it just seems like maybe Jalen's confidence is more so just on a surface level, and maybe underneath he's not nearly as confident as he portrays, because you can see with the way that he plays to his confidence just oozing. Jalen, on the other hand, he looks calm. I wouldn't say he plays confident unless he's taken off with the football and he's officially running it. He's tucked it. He's not looking downfield. And then from that point, you see a lot of confidence, and he's effective in that way. But defenses know that too. And I just think overall, you have to look at which player is going to be able to add the most value per play to Alabama's offense next year. So with that, we've talked a lot about both these guys. A lot of information has been thrown back and forth. If you were Nick Saban and you had to be the one to decide who's jogging out there, whether that be with the first string offense in spring training or in fall camp, who is the quarterback that you're running out there to take that first snap with the first team offense, in either one of those 2 situations?
I think that when you put Jalen Hurts at quarterback, you get a tremendous running ability, the calm demeanor, a great leader, and the team can kind of feed off of that confidence in a lot of ways, especially late in games when you need that. However, I think when you look at what you want to get out of a quarterback and you want what you want to see out of an offense and what any offensive coordinator is going to want for their receivers and the team around them, I think you have to go with Tua Tagovailoa. I think what he brings to the table is the ability to spread the ball out, to hit multiple guys. And it's hard to make receivers want to come play for you if they might catch 20 balls a year. The same goes for the running backs. When they're being stuffed at the line of scrimmage time after time after time because there's no threat of a passing game, they don't want to come play for you anymore. You're going to lose some of that pop that you may have garnered for that skill position. And we saw so early, the biggest receivers were really what struck Nick Saban's dynasty in Tuscaloosa with Julio Jones and Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley. And you don't want to lose those skill positions because you're too, maybe hard-headed to throw the guy out there who can get the ball to multiple people. And I think that Tua Tagovailoa really showed that he won over the locker room last year. He won over the players. He won over the offense, and I think he's the answer.
I completely agree with you. And, to me, I think what each of these guys could potentially give Alabama's team specifically next season is really, as far as talent and stuff, it would still be Tagovailoa. But I think even more so the deciding factor in this is what they're going to be able to provide the offense next year. Alabama's defense 2 years ago lost a ton of talent in their front 7. They lost, Jonathan Allen, Ryan Anderson, Tim Williams, a huge percentage of their sack production. And while they were still pretty good this past season, they weren't as good. Now you're looking at Alabama having to replace 6 of their top 7 players in the secondary. And so while next season, just because of who they are, being Alabama, I think they will do a pretty good job of finding adequate replacements for those six guys, but at the same time, just like with the front seven from the year before, I don't think they're as good in the secondary next year, and I don't think that they're going to be in the front seven on the same level as they were 2 years ago. So when you combine those two things, I think they need a more prolific offense than they have had in the last couple of years, and that means that a player like Tua, while he could provide or produce more turnovers than a guy like Jalen Hurts, I think ultimately he fits what Alabama needs from their offensive identity in 2018. So I think it's awesome that we came to a consensus on that. We are not always going to do that. There are going to be times where we disagree, and when we do, we're going to need to have a tiebreaker. So we'll definitely be coming up with somebody to join us and kind of settle the debate if there's ever one. But with this first one, perfect ending to the episode. So that's it for the very first episode of Bama Versus. I'm Clint Lamb. I'm so glad that you guys have been a part of today's discussion. We definitely want to hear from you guys with any questions or comments that you guys might have. We want to know who you think is going to be the starting quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide at the start of the 2018 season. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. What we're going to do is take a few of those key contributing comments that we had this week and implement them in our video next week, giving you guys credit for it. So definitely do that, and we look forward to talking to you guys next week.